and you're pretty sure that one path is good and one path is probably bad. How do you decide what path to take? What's your process of deciding? So why don't you turn to your neighbor and ask them that question. Yeah, what's your decision-making process? How would you go about making that decision? Okay. Wrap up your thought. Um, Sometimes it's really obvious, right? What the good thing is to do and what the bad thing is to do. Sometimes it's like painfully obvious, but a lot of times it's really tricky to know what the good thing, what the bad thing is, isn't it? So who wants to share what's kind of something you do to help you decide? Anyone want to share? Yeah, Nate. Flip a coin. All right. Does that work out for you? Sometimes? Okay. Yeah. If it's pretty evenly matched, yeah, and you're stuck. Yeah. Just start going down one path. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good and good.
Should I work out? Should I reflip?
Okay. All right.
Vanilla or chocolate ice cream?
Yeah.
Should I have the two desserts?
Cool. Anyone else? Flip of coins on the table.
Pray about it.
Pray. Yeah. That's good. What else? Yeah. Ask people you trust what they would do. Totally. What else? Yeah. Okay. See if there's a gut kind of Holy Spirit thing going on. That's good. That's hard too. How do you know what that feeling is? Sometimes it's obvious, isn't it? Yeah. Cool. What else? Yeah. The Bible? Scripture? I have a friend, his name's Nate, and he'll just make a decision, and then he'll let that decision kind of settle in, because when you're in between, you kind of you don't know which way to go, but when you make a decision finally, all the reality of that decision just kind of all of a sudden hits you, and then he kind of feels it out for a second, and then decides if he really wants that decision. So he kind of wears the decision on for a second. Deciding between what's good and bad, or what's good and better, or what's good and really unfortunate. This is the most important skill of being human. And yesterday afternoon, I think we were all tired, but we started talking about the first story in the Bible where God put a tree in the middle of the garden, and there was the tree of life, and next to it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or the knowledge of good and bad. And God said, don't eat of that tree. Don't take that decision on your own terms. Instead, what did he want Adam and Eve to do? Yeah, eat anything else, including the tree of life, including walking with God in the garden. And so you get this picture of like, instead of taking the knowledge of good and evil, or good and bad on their own terms, there was this like relationship that they could have, walking with God, and they could ask God, hey, I've got this choice to make, or, what should I do about this or that? What God was training Adam and Eve to do was to listen to his voice and to trust in his wisdom instead of their own. And that's like the center story of the Bible is, can we become people who listen to the wisdom of God and trust God to tell us which paths to take at any given moment? We talked about how Torah means what? You guys remember Torah means law? It's kind of an unfortunate translation, actually. It means teaching or instruction. Torah is a way that you help guide someone. If you went to a friend, sorry, what was your name again? You said Josie. Josie. Last time it was Jewel. Sorry, Josie this time. Josie said she talks with a friend or a mentor to get guidance. When you're doing that, you're going to your friend for Torah, for instruction. You're not really going for a law, right? Maybe you want them just to kind of put down the hammer and be like, this is what thou shalt do. But you kind of want them to give you wisdom. That's Torah. So the very first instance of Torah in the Bible is God saying, don't take of good and bad on your own terms. Trust my voice. Trust my command. And Adam and Eve don't do that. And then there comes the whole tragedy of the human condition. So that's the first command broken in the Bible. What's the second command that was broken in the Bible? Yeah. Thou shalt not kill. What story are you thinking of? Cain and Abel. That's right. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Jesus, after he says, I've come to fulfill the Torah, meaning you want to know how to get God's instruction, God's wisdom in your life, I'm coming to fulfill that. And the first example he gives is he quotes from the Ten Commandments, and he says, you have heard that it was said, do not murder. And then he gives God's wisdom underneath that command, do not murder. Before we read Jesus' teaching again, we read it yesterday, but we'll read it again. Let's first read the story of Cain and Abel. Does that sound cool? Open up to Genesis chapter 4 in your Bible, if you have a Bible with you. I'll put it up on the screen if you don't. There's a cool image of the tree of, you see the tree of life in the back? It's this big kind of blooming, intense tree. It almost looks like a nuclear bomb going off. The artist drew it that way on purpose, just to kind of show like eating of the tree of life is actually going to be an intense experience. And then, but closer in, kind of on the way, on the journey to the tree of life, you kind of have to duck under this other tree, which is the tree of knowing good and bad. I love that image. All right, second command to be broken, murder. Let's turn to Genesis 4. Okay, you all there? So Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant. That's how it works. And gave birth to Cain. Cain's the firstborn son. And she says, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. And then later she gave birth to his brother Abel. So Cain and Abel. Cain's the firstborn, Abel's the secondborn. This is in a culture where being the firstborn is really significant. The firstborn gets a double inheritance. They carry on the family legacy. The secondborn, not so much. So the firstborn is favored in this culture. Any firstborns here? Yeah? All right. What's that?
The women don't really count, though.
No, okay, yeah, not back then. So today, I'm a firstborn, and I'm not getting a special inheritance from my family. We've moved beyond that. But you're right. In this culture, it was a patriarchal culture. It was the firstborn sons, and the women didn't have that benefit. Okay, Cain's the oldest. Cain should be getting the favor. Abel's the youngest. Abel, he kept flocks. He was a shepherd. And Cain worked the soil, so he was a farmer. In the course of time, Cain brought some of his farming goods, his fruits of the soil, and he gave them as an offering to God. And Abel, he also brought an offering, but he was a farmer, so what did he bring? He brought the fatty part of the animals, and he offered it before God. From the firstborn of his flock. And Yahweh looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. And so Cain was angry and his face was downcast. Now there's kind of a big riddle in here. Did Cain give a better offering and that's why God favored? Did Abel give a better offering and is that why he favored Abel? Or was it that God was just taking turns? Because when you read the laws in Leviticus, giving a sacrifice of your harvest is actually a very appropriate sacrifice to make. It's not like a bad sacrifice. But there's also something here where like Cain seemed to like give something that God was a little bit more interested in, the fatty portions of a firstborn animal. But either way, God gives favor on Abel, and how does that make Cain feel? He's angry. He's angry. And his face was downcast. And so Yahweh said to Cain, Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, really the door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. This word here, will you not be accepted? It's actually more literally, will you not also get favor? Will you not also be lifted up? Have you been in a situation where someone in your life is getting something that you wish you had? Think back through your childhood. Maybe it was a sibling. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was a frenemy. Maybe it was a sibling's friend. But like they had something, they got to experience something, maybe they owned something, and it made you a little jealous. You got something in your mind? Can you think of that? Think of how that makes you feel. Cain, he saw that his brother was getting God's favor and not him. And it's good to kind of empathize with Cain for a second. That's a really sucky place to be. When someone like seems to be like everything's working out for them. Like they have a life that you wish you had. They've got stuff that you wish you had. Things just work out for them in ways that doesn't work out for you. And there's kind of this feeling of, like, does God love me too? Have you ever had that feeling? Does God care about me as much as he cares about this other person? And that's a hard place to be. And it can make us sad. and Cain's situation, it made him angry. Anger is an interesting emotion. Tristan, my wife, and I, we wrote a book about emotions. I am a very heady intellectual guy, so I lived my whole life kind of pretending emotions didn't matter and that I didn't really have emotions. And so writing this book with Tristan was an exploration to kind of figure out what emotions were and why they were valuable. And anger is an emotion that we have that signals that there's something we want to protect. There's something happening that we think is wrong, and we need to fight to protect that thing. That makes sense? What is Cain, why do you think Cain's feeling angry? What does he want to protect? What's that?
His
Status? Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's the firstborn. He deserves the favor. Don't we all just want to be loved by God and accepted by God? And so this feeling of anger was kind of signaling to Cain man, what I want to be favored by God. I want God's love. And so what does God say? He says, do what is right, and you too will be lifted up. There's two really interesting things going on here that I want to point out, and then we'll go to the teaching. One is that Cain didn't believe that there was enough of God's favor and abundance for both him and his brother. He's like, if my brother's getting favor right now, there's not enough for me. So he didn't believe in the abundance of God. But secondly, he started to feel like his brother didn't deserve God's favor. Have you ever been in a situation where, well, I guess I could be honest for a second. I had a friend who always was kind of at odds with him and I, just always kind of locking horns. And then we had a falling out. And it's kind of an unfortunate thing in life, is having friends that you lose and not knowing how to repair those relationships. But I still saw him online, right? Still saw him post. I see him post things online all the time. And there's something about watching what he posts online that makes me really interested. What's this guy up to? And what I found is, I think the reason I'm intensely interested is because I kind of want to see him make a mistake. I think I want to see him get what he deserves. And what I noticed is I started to have contempt for him in my heart. It wasn't that I think he really deserves to have bad things happen to him, but I started to believe that it'd be kind of nice maybe if he learned a lesson. I started to believe that he it was okay if something bad happened to him. This contempt that you have, that you can develop for someone, Jesus is going to go on and teach us, is just as big of a problem as murdering someone. And in this story with Cain and Abel, Cain's going to go on and he's actually going to literally murder his brother. He starts to get so jealous that his brother's getting favor and not him, that his brother doesn't deserve favor, that it leads him to this thought process of, you know what? It'd be good just to kill my brother. He doesn't deserve anything. He doesn't even deserve life. And so what Jesus is going to show us is that whole thought process of, I don't think there's enough, to that person doesn't deserve what he has, to, wouldn't it be nice if that person got what they deserve, to, I'm going to give that person what they deserve. That whole thing is a problem. And that whole thing in our heart is just as bad as murder. So, you guys want to turn to this teaching of Jesus? Okay. Let's read it together. Why don't we stand up, and will someone read? It's case study 1, murder and contempt. Any volunteers? Yeah. Go ahead. Ainsley, right? Okay.
Murder and contempt. Wait, do you want me to read this version?
Sure.
Okay. You have heard that it was said to the ancients, "You will not murder," and whoever murders will be guilty by the court. And I say to you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be guilty by the court. And whoever calls his brother good for nothing will be guilty by the Sanhedrin. And whoever says fool will be guilty of the fire of Gehenna. Therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar, and go first be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. Settle matters in a friendly way with your legal opponent while you are with him on the way, so that your opponent doesn't hand you over to the court judge, and the court judge to the officer, so that you are thrown into prison. Truly I say to you, you will not come out of there until you have paid back the last coin.
Thank you, Ainsley. All right, sit down. Turn to someone new and tell them one question you have about this passage, one thing that piqued your interest, that you wonder what it might mean, or if there's something more there that you don't understand. You need one? Oh, you got a good question? Okay, we'll come to you first. All right, finish up your question. All right, I think we had one back here. And your name? Noah. The Sanhedrin. That's a great question. We'll get to that. The Sanhedrin is a great question. What else? I heard a lot of chattering. There's got to be something. Yeah.
I think it's interesting how it says, it's like talking about how you should go to reconcile with other people before you reconcile with God. It's like, first be reconciled to your brother, come present your offering.
Yeah.
Like, normally we would think about things like, oh, go to God first, always, and like, worship and praise Him first, always, but it's like trying to fit it into
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
I had a question about like what Gehenna was, and if it was the same like actual physical place that one of the prophets like burnt or like threw, I don't know, cleared the temple. Like that. I don't know if I'm thinking.
It's a great question. Cool. We'll get to Gehenna. I think we'll have time to get to Gehenna. What else is on your guys' minds? Yeah.
Why do the actions that deserve punishment get lesser and lesser, but the punishments get greater and greater?
Yeah, okay. That's great. You've been studying this. We'll get to that. Yeah, it's very interesting. There's three kind of actions here. Angry with your brother, good for nothing, fool. And they kind of decrease in intensity while the consequences increase in intensity. We'll look at that. One more question? Anyone? I love questions. Questions are really important. I think a lot of times we start reading the Bible and we don't allow ourselves just to have questions because we worry that too many questions will make us not be sensitive to the voice of God or help us not really find the answers. But I think the opposite is true. Yes? What about righteous anger? Wonderful question. It's a great question. Why don't we start there? See if I can. Okay. You've heard that it was said to the ancients, do not murder. Whoever murders will be guilty by the court. Pretty straightforward. Do not murder. You'll be guilty if you murder. But what if you don't murder someone, but you actually just really, really just hate people and you have contempt for people? Is that still a problem? And that's what Jesus wants to discuss. So, like we said, there's 3 things that he'll go through, and the first one is anger. And I say to you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be guilty by the court. Now, there's anger, and then there's anger. And then there's anger. Anger is a very rich, complicated emotion, right? So there's anger like I stubbed my toe, and I'm angry that that thing was right there in front of me. It's just that, anger. Or someone cuts me off in traffic, and I'm like, oh, you feel that anger. That's anger. I don't think that's the kind of anger Jesus is talking about here. But that is a signal to tell you that you're trying to protect something, you're worried about something, or you're frustrated about something. It's a signal for you. Then there's righteous anger. Like God is often in the Bible referred to as having righteous anger. And there's this good protective anger of like some injustice is happening. Someone's being taken advantage of, and that makes me angry. And that's a good signal for you to then go, I need to go and try to fix that. I need to help protect that. Anger is a signal that something needs to be protected, right? So there's this kind of like the simple anger, stub my toe, I got to remember that my dresser's right there and I'm angry at myself. There's that righteous anger of injustice. That's happening. Someone needs to be protected. Then there's the anger that Cain had. What kind of anger did Cain have? He had like a jealous anger. What did it turn into? His jealous anger turned into something else. What's that? Hatred. Contemptuous anger. Like murderous rage. I think this is the kind of anger Jesus is talking about here. He's not talking about the anger of, I want to protect something or someone. It's that anger of like, that person doesn't have value, and this rage against people. It's that kind of anger. I don't think it's any accident that the very first real story of breaking a command is a brother murdering his own brother. And for the first case study that Jesus does is on murder. And here's the thing, like, we're not going to murder people. I just really think probably here in this room, likely none of you will murder someone. If you do, it's probably on accident. Manslaughter. Hit someone with your car. Yeah. But this propensity that we have inside of us to start to think that other people aren't valuable, and I could actually kind of have contempt for them, we are all going to deal with that. And so congratulations, you won't murder someone. But what about this thing inside of us that can get out of control? So it's a great question. I think this is that intense, raging anger. And so you also will be guilty by the courts. In the Jesus-style kingdom, that's just as big of a deal. That hatred towards the other. Did anyone, I think I saw someone looking up, we translate whoever calls his brother good for nothing. Did anyone look up in their translation what that is? Who has NIV? What does that say? Raka. Yeah, NIV doesn't translate it. It's raka. It's an Aramaic term of contempt. And it literally means?
It says it's a term of abuse.
Of abuse? Yeah. It's a way to slander someone, and it's a type of slander of saying, you have no value. You are worthless. Raka. It's like the ultimate term of contempt. Like if you have murderous anger in your heart, you're probably going to call someone raka. Worthless. But it's better to call someone worthless than to like rage against them, right? And like have that kind of raging anger. But the consequence actually goes up. You'll be guilty by the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, great question, is kind of like the Supreme Court. You guys know the Supreme Court? You got how many? 12 justices, I think there is. And if you go to your local court, and the local court's like, you're guilty, you can go, okay, well, that's cool, I'm going to take it up. And then you can go to like the district court, and the district court can be like, yeah, you're still guilty, okay, I'm going to take it up. And you can take all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Sanhedrin was like the Supreme Court of the day. It was the Jewish Supreme Court. So if you had trouble with your like Jewish brother, you would go to the Sanhedrin. If it was like a deal with the Romans, the Sanhedrin didn't always have the same kind of a power and authority. But it was like a higher court. Basically, the point is, you call someone worthless, we're going up the chain. Now you're like in trouble by an even higher court. Does that make sense? And then the third one, whoever calls someone a fool will be guilty of the fire of Gehenna. Fool isn't nice. It's not a nice thing to say to someone. But it's not as bad as calling someone worthless. In fact, there's a lot of proverbs in the Bible that calls people fools. But so Jesus kind of like at the very end of this, he kind of throws this kind of just like, I don't know, a sideways pitch, this kind of riddle here. Even if you call someone a fool, you're not going to be guilty of the court. You're not even guilty of the like highest court. You're guilty of the fire of Gehenna. Jesus is trying to scramble our brains here and reassess like the way we use language, our heart posture towards people, and take it with like some new level of scrutiny and intensity. That even calling someone a fool is a problem. Because it all starts going up the chain from that person's a fool to that person actually it doesn't really have any value to like, man, I hope something bad happens to that person. You can kind of see how this grows. Gehenna. You guys want to talk about Gehenna for a second? Gehenna is translated in most Bible translations as hell. It's one of like 4 different words in your Bible that's going to be translated as hell. In the Old Testament, it's usually Sheol. It's translated as hell. A lot of times, the grave. In the New Testament, it's Gehenna, Hades. I think Tartarus is a word translated as hell. But Gehenna is a very specific word, and Jesus uses it on purpose. It's a very evocative word. And I'm sorry, your name in the brown sweatshirt? Lily. You said it was something about a place where you put stuff, right? Like it was. So I think maybe what you're thinking about was there has been this interpretation that right outside of Jerusalem is kind of up the city on a hill, and there's a wall around Jerusalem. And on one side, there's this valley called the Valley of Gehenna. And there was a time when all the trash of Jerusalem was thrown into this valley. So it was like a trash heap. And then every once in a while they'd burn it. And so you got this like burning trash heap. And so it became popular popular interpretation to think, oh, that's what Jesus is referring to, is the like burning trash heap outside of Jerusalem. And it is true that there was a burning trash heap outside of Jerusalem, but it didn't exist during the time of Jesus. It was kind of a Middle Ages phenomenon that happened. So Jesus was not referring to the burning trash heap. But he was referring to something very specific that happened in the valley of Gehenna. And I could explain it, but what's cool is we just finished a video. It's just a quick 1-minute video. No one has seen it outside of Bible Project. You guys are going to be the first ones. We haven't released it yet. And it's a quick explanation on Gehenna. So let me pull that up. While I pull it up, where did I put it? Desktop. Yeah, it's fine. Where do you stream? Where do you stream it? Okay.
Literally only the sick people at our house.
Does it stay up or does it go down?
But you can't really see the screen.
Oh yeah, you can't really see the screen. It's fine. It's fine.
You can make it go black.
I can mark the YouTube private until we release it.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. It'll be funny. We'll see if people.
Hannah, it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into Gehenna. The New Testament Greek word Gehenna, usually translated as hell, refers to the way God's justice will deal with evil in the world. Gehenna comes from the Hebrew phrase Gehinnom, which means the Valley of Wailing. It's an actual valley on the southwest side of Jerusalem. There, some of ancient Israel's kings sacrificed children to other gods as burnt offerings. The prophets confronted this evil, saying that God would send enemy nations to conquer Jerusalem, and Israel's leaders would be killed, and their dead bodies thrown into the valley to be burned. The fires that those kings started to consume the innocent would one day turn and consume them. Jesus used these images of fire and Gehenna to describe God's response to the horrible evils in our world. He won't let them go unchecked. The fire of God's justice will one day consume evil and remove it from his good creation, once and for all. Whoever says, "You fool," will be guilty of the fire of Gehenna.
Okay. So, in this valley, and this is actually in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, is stories of these kings who would go and make sacrifices to other gods, including child sacrifices. And the prophets confronted them, and they used this vivid language of God's fiery justice coming. The same fire that they were using was going to be turned on to them. It's a very evocative image, isn't it? That we could go and start to do evil, and that evil becomes a fire in and of itself that will consume us. That's the image that Jesus uses to describe the most ultimate consequence, God's justice. You've got the court, you got the Sanhedrin, and then you got God's justice. And God's justice is letting your evil just take you out. That's the idea behind Gehenna. Okay, so Jesus ends with two parables. Oh, well here I just kind of wanted to show visually. Murderous anger to you're worthless, to you're stupid, it kind of de-escalates. But then you can kind of see it like escalates. Local court, high court, Gehenna fire. It's just there to scramble your brain. Okay, it ends with two parables. We already kind of mentioned the one, which was, hey, if you're going and presenting an offering at the altar, and then you remember, you know what? I've been a jerk to my brother. I've been contemptuous to my brother. I've been calling him names. In my heart, I hate him, and he has something against me because of that. I think you have to read this in context of the teaching. That's why he has something against you. Should I make my offering before God? No. Leave your offering at the altar, go and be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. We don't do this. We don't go and present offerings at the temple, but the same idea applies. Like, if you're like going to a worship session, going to a prayer meeting, and like God just puts it on your heart, like, hey, you have contempt for someone in your life, and you've been treating them poorly. Jesus says, you know what the first thing you should do is just go and deal with that. There's a famous verse in Hosea 6:6. God says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. So this was a time where Israel was making all the correct sacrifices, but they were being violent towards their brother. They were oppressing the poor. And God's like, you don't get it. What I care the most is how you treat your brother. That's what I care the most about. That's how you acknowledge me. So do that right before you come and give me offerings. And then the second parable, he says, settle matters in a friendly way with your legal opponent. This is now a little parable about like you're going to get sued by someone. So let's say you have someone who's going to sue you, their illegal opponent, and you and this guy who's going to sue you, you're walking to court where the judge is going to decide. And you know you're wrong, right? You know you actually have contempt for this guy is kind of the point of this parable. Well, why don't you deal with matters while you're walking to court instead of letting the judge decide? Because if you're guilty, and in this parable it kind of assumes you're guilty, the judge is going to give you your consequence. And so this parable is about how we should really be shrewd, and we should be timely about dealing with any issue of relational contempt that we have with another person. Before you give any sort of offering to God, deal with it first. And before you get into a situation where you're going to be judged, why don't you deal with it with your friend right away? So this is Jesus' teaching on murder. You have heard that it was said, do not murder. And it's easy to go, well, cool, great, check. I haven't murdered. And Jesus says, what's going on inside, though? Is there someone in your life that you just can't stand? And in your heart, you start to believe, I don't think they really deserve good things. Take that just as seriously. So to go back to this whole idea of knowing good from bad, you brought up, and sorry, I'm bad with names, Maria. Maria brought up, when I need to know good from bad, I'll go to the Bible. And Jesus is showing us what that can look like, even in these ancient laws. When you go to the Bible, you can find God's deep ethical kind of wisdom for us. But it'll happen in a surprising way. It won't be like, oh yeah, you know what the answer to your question is? You should take this path. The wisdom might be, hey, have you considered that you have a relational problem in your life? Go and deal with that first. That God's wisdom is accessible to us through these commands, and Jesus wants us to hear God's voice underneath all of it. There's this deep, deep wisdom that applies to us. So Jesus is going to do this with 5 more case studies. We don't have time to do all 5 case studies. If we do end up with time and you want to touch on any of them, let me know later. But the next one's on lust, and then there's one on divorce, oath-keeping, how you treat your enemies, and retaliation. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back. What time is it? Perfect. We'll come back around 10 o'clock, and we'll start up again. And we'll go to, past the case studies, we're going to go to, what's the next section? Title middle section. The next section in the greater righteousness is religious practices. We'll go to religious practices. Okay. See you guys at 10. What?
I got so excited about
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and then I just
It's
had-
cool, right?
Like, I should have.
No, it's perfect.
Have that one.
Oh, no, no, no. I love that. I teed it up.
I was like, dude, is it teeing it up or is it stealing your thunder?
No,
I
no,
don't want
no.
to do the second.
No, no,
That's
no,
the
no.
last thing.
No, absolutely not.
Okay,
Absolutely
okay.
not. Yeah. I really struggled with that, though, because the anger thing, it doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like kind of the least intense. Like, just anger is anger.
Yeah.
But when he